right, so the fallout continues from that Back Bay fire that killed 2 Boston firefighters. Federal agency that oversees workplace safety announcing today that it will fine the welding company that allegedly started this fire for a number of safety violations, and that's why we're bringing in our investigative reporter, Mike Beaudet. Mike, you were actually at that fire. You've been following the story from the very beginning. You were the first one to talk about that welding company, I believe.
We were.
Give me the latest. What's going on?
Well, OSHA coming out and basically saying this was a needless, tragic fire, and going after the company with 10 serious violations of workplace safety and levying $58,000 in fines, and talking about all sorts of issues there. We remember that the officials came out and said that this was started by welding that was going on next door in the Back Bay. Of course, we have to remember those 2 firefighters who were killed. And so we knew the welding was an issue, but now we have OSHA actually saying that this company, D&J Ironworks out of Malden, they say acted recklessly. They didn't have a fire watch on the scene. They didn't have a permit, which we already knew, but they didn't have someone actually watching. Remember, it was incredibly windy that day as well.
Right.
And they also say that their employees lacked basic safety training.
What was the very first thing you said that OSHA said? What was the very first thing you just said? What they found? That they had poor, what was it?
That they basically had well, there's a bunch of things that they ultimately found, but among them, they talked about the fact that the company didn't have the training and also didn't have the fire watch person there. Someone who's actually supposed to be there monitoring to see if there are actually flames coming and if there's, and remember how windy it was that day.
But when you said that and then we put up the pictures of the firefighters, at that moment it was just, it just is like a sucker punch, because you think if it's unnecessary, if this could have been prevented, and then you look at these 2 men who, you know, had families and a fiance and a mother and kids, and you just think, how could that ever happen?
Right, and then you go back to what OSHA is saying, needless.
That's the word. That was it, needless.
Tragic fire. Didn't have to happen if the company, according to OSHA, had followed these rules. Now the company, we're hearing from the attorney that represents D&J Ironworks, and the attorney is saying it was a tragedy, yes, but there was no criminal intent here. And they say they're going to go to OSHA, they're going to talk about the situation with them, and they say that the law and the facts don't match up with these violations. So they're fighting this. What OSHA's saying.
Let's take a closer look at what these OSHA fines mean. This is Amy Cronin right here. She's a chemical engineer and expert on fire codes, now president of Strategic Code Solutions. Amy, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Maria.
Your reaction when you heard Mike say those words, I think, was the same as my reaction.
It is so heartbreaking when you think of Lieutenant Walsh and firefighter Kennedy's families. And needless, it is absolutely needless. When you look at the regulations, the things that they did to cause this fire, it was well documented, things that they were not supposed to do. You mentioned it, they didn't get their permit, they didn't think about combustibles 35 feet away, never mind at an elevation. Windy situation.
It was so windy out there. I mean,
you were there.
I was out there, and you can't even imagine how windy it was. So
it was predictable and it was preventable, which makes it all the more just heart-wrenching. It really does.
And then you have OSHA coming out today, $58,000 in fines. We're talking about 2 firefighters who are dead here, and those families that are going through this agony now. $58,000 doesn't seem like all that much.
Well, it is. In many cases, there were 10 violations that were cited, and they were cited the maximum amount that they possibly could, a serious violation of $7,000. So 4 of the violations got the $7,000, the other 6 got $5,000. The 4 that were the most egregious were the ones that were directly related to welding, and the others were sort of important but paperwork related, training, you know, other things like that.
So it's basically those are the most serious violations that OSHA can make?
Well, there's one
is there a fault there? Does that need to be fixed?
Well, it's from what I understand, the maximum penalties are set by Congress. So to me, the fines are not nearly where they should be.
That's my question.
It's a slap on the wrist. I mean, if that's the punishment, $58,000?
Well, I think the punishment is going to come when the civil liability and perhaps criminal charges maybe come about because when OSHA is looking at something, they have very specific things they can look at. When you're talking civil liability, you can bring in things that OSHA can't even look at, such as, or that didn't even mention, like the permitting, the fact that, you know, there's allegations that they left the scene, they denied it after the fact. You know, all these things are, of course, allegations that'll come out in court. But there's a lot more, you know, that people can, for damages, can really deal with the civil litigation.
And we have, of course, multiple civil suits already filed. You mentioned the criminal charges as well. Reached out to the district attorney's office. They say a decision on whether anyone will be charged criminally has still not been made.
And
so,
they said back in April, if you recall, the Suffolk County prosecutors, they made a particular note in this case that Massachusetts doesn't have a negligent homicide statute.
Which makes you think there won't be charges.
Well, there might be charges, but, you know, how serious they can go is serious, but there's no negligent homicide.
interesting, because every single thing that you just said raises so many questions. So if lawmakers are making these decisions, perhaps they should change what these fines are. And the last thing that you just said, I mean, obviously, this needs to be looked at again. And if this isn't a perfect example to go back and make some changes, I don't know what is.
I agree.
Amy Cronin from Strategic Code Solutions, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.